So let's see. Today, it's bright in here today, don't you think?
It is exactly the same right now.
It's
Yeah.
about the same.
Okay. It must be me.
Yep.
It's nice outside today. So let's see what we're yakking about today. Planars versus ribbons. What's the difference? Headphones. Planar headphones, ribbon headphones.
Okay.
Well, there's not many ribbon headphones.
No.
There's
Oh.
only a handful, and they're kind of sort of newer.
Yeah.
At least they're perceived to be newer, actually. We vaguely talked about this
Yes.
on one of our earlier videos, like designing the 1266 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the first model we were doing when we were working on the driver, we actually started with a ribbon driver, right? It was a pleated ribbon.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a Heil style.
Yeah. Which is interesting because now there's a headphone manufacturer that has a
That was in
pleated
our
ribbon
infancy,
driver.
though, trying this stuff. So it was
Yeah.
a pretty crude setup, but
Yeah, we ran into the same problems that current ribbons run into.
Yeah.
Power. We were like,
Yeah.
we didn't have enough of it.
yeah,
Well, there's a lot of problems with it.
efficiency
Yeah.
was bad.
Efficiency
Yeah.
wasn't
It was-
stellar.
Distortion was through the roof. But
Yeah.
we had a shitty setup, but,
Yes,
but
it
still,
was-
it looked like it was going to be a terrible thing to try to get right.
It wasn't refined. Now, obviously, it was very early stages. We were
Yeah.
experimenting.
We were still
with it.
learning.
We were prototyping, but yeah, it offered a lot of issues that are entirely mitigated with a conventional planar magnetic.
Which is a tensioned diaphragm.
Well, you could see the issues, right?
Yeah.
With the pleating, you're effectively guaranteeing that you're further separated from the magnet if it's a permanent magnet driver. And in addition to that, if it does actually move in that orientation, if it squeezes the air out,
Yeah.
the trace pattern on it is going to move relative to the field quite considerably, much more so than you would get with a conventional tension flat membrane. So you got pros, but you got a considerable amount of cons that are very, very challenging to mitigate.
Yeah, I mean, what we found and what we worked with on our flat diaphragm was bad enough in terms of these microphase distortions we were eliminating. There's no way to do it on a pleat. You can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
There's just no way.
Yeah.
It's just because you got the mag field coming at it from all different angles. And it's just going to mess with your brain.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's really never going to work out. And the other thing you could see is at some point you have to add a lot of damping to the headphone. You got to dumb it down. You got to put absorption material in the headphone so that you don't hear the mistakes, the crinkling noises it might make at certain frequencies or whatever. Let's call it that.
Well, yeah.
So,
That's the other thing. Yeah.
you got so
Everything.
basically you're rolling the highs off because you've got to put additional damping in it to tame that.
Yep.
I mean, I think piano would rip a driver like that apart pretty much.
Yeah. Well, we didn't even get that far.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I didn't even bother.
We probably should describe the difference between a ribbon driver and a conventional planar magnetic. Right. So a planar magnetic, typically you have a membrane with a trace pattern deposited on it. It's immersed in a magnetic field, tensioned on some sort of frame. And with a ribbon driver, typically you have some sort of thin membrane that does not have a trace pattern, but it could in some
Well,
circumstances.
it's a conductive thin membrane.
Usually
The whole
conductive thin
thing's
membrane.
made of foil
yeah.
or something
Right.
like that, some material.
That
Yeah.
typically is somewhat pleated, and it's sometimes suspended. There's a lot of different ways you could do it, though, so
Right.
that's a tricky one.
The reason they pleat it is because I think it's only tensioned grabbed at either end. So the ribbon kind of floats. There's no side,
Right.
nothing holding it on its sides, just
Right.
pinched at either end.
Typically.
So without the pleating, I think it would have a lot of problems at certain frequencies where it would be out of control. The pleating, I think, helps absorb any kind of like standing wave that might run along and give you some sort of peak in a response or something, probably in the bass.
Yeah,
I
it's
would imagine.
Like a ribbon mic.
Yeah, right.
Right. This has been pretty common for a very long time in microphones.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now people are applying this technology for headphones,
Mhm.
which is definitely very far out of their typical use.
But because it's a conductive strip, it's like, what, 0.1 ohms, 0.2 ohms?
Yeah,
It's
so
sort
they're
of-
super low.
So you can't
impedance.
run it into any amp. You need a transformer to put in series
Right.
with it.
If
It needs
you're
a
talking about
box.
that.
Yeah.
You gotta have an external box to hook it up to. It's not something you could
Right.
use with a conventional headphone amp.
Right.
But there are different designs.
Yeah.
There are the conventional, basically the same thing as a planar magnetic, but folded up. And I think most people will call that a ribbon.
Sure.
So it's complicated, I guess, but there are the kind that are effectively folded planar magnetic, and they're the kind that are basically metal or metallized substrate. And they could either be not pleated or very lightly pleated, or sometimes even heavily pleated. But the application in headphones is pretty new, and I think there's pretty stark differences between them.
Well, the reason it's new is sorry to cut you off, but the reason it's new is because it's always been used for basically as a tweeter.
Right.
In the past,
Right.
it's used in speakers strictly for high frequencies, and that's because when you throw bass frequencies at these things, they flip. They're too loosely bound. They distort all the hell. They're not
Right.
made to
Yeah.
produce bass. They're made. I mean, I've seen, like, I dealt with a guy that worked with Heil Oscar years ago. He's out in California, and he's made speakers. He's made these drivers. In fact, we have a pair in the back here.
Yes.
And he hand pleats them and blah blah blah. But bottom line is that I understand what he went through to make the driver, and they had to you horn load. It's a pretty big driver. It's probably this big, you know,
Yeah.
as a tweeter goes, and they even horn load it to try to bring its frequency response down lower without driving it too hard into distortion, where you get to a low frequency where it just can't handle it. So I think in their case he was impressed that it would do 300 hertz, which for
Right.
a tweeter is really low. That's the
Right.
mid. That's a mid-range driver. But he said he can do 300 with this thing properly horn loaded, and he did. But he still he crossed it over higher because you don't want to go there because you're running into all kinds of other issues with a speaker
Yeah.
and crossing over to a mid or a bass driver. But yeah, bottom line is that's the problem with all those drivers, and even in a headphone setting, I think would be you're going to run into some distortion issues when you
Well, at
you
high
start going
volumes,
really
yeah.
low frequencies. Yeah, particularly at higher volumes. Yeah.
Well, it's very challenging to make a full range pleated diaphragm like that work well. There's typically they move like more of an accordion style, whereas a planar magnetic tend to move more pistonic, so more or less in one orientation up and down. Whereas a pleated, they're tend to made more or less to scrunch, expand and
At
squeeze.
some frequencies.
Right.
Yeah.
So the challenge with that is
So the pleat height sets up. You know what I mean?
Everything's moving
Everything's got to be.
relative to the field, yeah.
It'd be a very very difficult thing to optimize even for
Yeah.
headphone use.
Balancing act for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
You're never going to get it really totally right
So
in the
there's
lows.
a lot of challenges with that, but there are companies that are now doing it, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
It's always exciting to see new driver technologies out
Oh,
on the
yeah,
market.
absolutely.
Some people really like it, but it is very different. And oddly enough, we ended up trying it. It was
Yeah.
the first driver technology we went across. It was in the early days when we were prototyping drivers for 1266. We started with a pleated diaphragm because we thought that would be the approach.
Because I have knowledge of it. Like I said, I know
Right.
I know a man that worked with him, and so I knew how he was building the tweeters. I said, well, we'll try this. Maybe it'll
Seems
be
like a good place
cool-
to start.
Yeah, right. So,
Yeah.
but
Didn't
so
work
far,
out.
I think there's only been one company that's done it so far with a headphone.
that
And,
shipped it.
yeah, right. I think they have.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did this like
Yeah.
7 years ago.
And even
or
then, you
8
don't
years ago.
hear a lot of feedback on it, so I don't know where it stands. So, in terms of how it's working out for them.
Well, like anything, some people really like it, others mixed. So, yeah.
Same with the ribbon. You see that out, and it's really clear sounding. Well, you guys have heard it, right? Yeah, the small thin ribbon that requires a transformer and a 200 watt
Yeah.
power speaker amp and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, sounds good, right? I mean, it's clear.
Yeah.
It does certain things
It's
very well.
hyper clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you ask me, it's like
So this is definitely
turning
one
up
of
the
those,
contrast 120%.
Pretty much.
on the music.
This is
Yeah.
one of those stories where certain people hear different things. Certain people are really focusing on different aspects of the sound. And so there are certain things that something like a metal ribbon would do better than anything else, or maybe exaggerate even in certain circumstances.
Right.
And to certain people, that's massively preferable. So if you have very unusual tastes, that could be a very strong option for
Yeah.
you. But it's very different.
Yeah, if you're listening to stuff that doesn't require bass.
Yeah, it depends what you're listening to.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know where it rolls, but it sounds like it below 100, it's got a real issue. They can't even do it.
It's very hard to make the
Like you don't even hear bass drum. You barely hear it. It's
Well,
so low
yeah.
down.
yeah,
It's
you're
so-
not
it's
going
so-
to get
so low
the
down.
impact that you
Yeah.
would get on something like a
Well,
iPhone.
okay, I shouldn't say you don't hear it, but
Well, yeah.
it doesn't sound like a bass drum.
Well.
You know what I mean? The real low freaks aren't there.
Right.
It can't do it. It's for obvious reasons. It's a
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a thin.
In free air.
Yeah, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
right.
Well, this particular one is loosely coupled, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's very challenging in most circumstances to have a loosely coupled driver
but like
produce
people
bass.
said, it does do some things really cool that you can't get with anything else. But
Yeah,
but yeah, again, for music though, I think it'd be difficult if you're playing full range music. That's
Well.
difficult. I mean, it's cool to have a microscope, but I wouldn't want to listen to music with a microscope. So
very much depends on
it's a
the
cool
person.
tool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we're somewhat familiar with this as we fiddled with it for a period of time many years ago. And in our experience, we find that the single head-in, single-piece magnet, planar magnetic approach is the optimal. So I guess if somebody's looking for, because this is actually a viewer question,
Yeah,
but if somebody's looking for
All right.
our experience or our feedback or what we think about these things,
yeah,
we think they're pretty good technologies. They're
and we
They're
should.
functional. They
You said
have
single-ended. We're going to mean single-sided, like we do. We're
right.
Right.
yeah, we have a unique driver. I mean, we have
Yes.
a patent on a driver. It's not like anybody else's planar. It's almost like flipping a planar upside down and doing it the directly opposite way that everyone else does.
It's a
it.
very unusual
Yeah,
approach
kinda,
to a planar. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then we've honed in on that from there over the years. So yeah, it's a very unique driver that what we're doing. That obviously because we have a patent, it hasn't existed before. In planar tech, everyone's done it a different way.
Yeah.
Speaker manufacturers, everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of cool.
But of course, since we are continuing to pursue the approach we've endeavored into with planars, it seems pretty clear that that's what we consider to be optimal, and that's what we like best. Different people have different tastes, though.
Yeah,
so that's,
totally.
that's A-okay.
And you find that most people are running multiple headphones anyway at this level.
Yeah.
Right.
They'll have a ribbon because it does cool things. They'll
Right.
have a couple planars because it does cool things. They'll have a dynamic
Right.
because it does cool things.
Yes.
And it's certain. So it's some people do that. But if you're looking for an all-around solution, though, yeah, you really want full range. I mean, you really got to do 20 hertz and up. You really don't want to avoid the bass range because that's the foundation for the music. I think you could ask any speaker guy, right?
It's important. I mean, there's clearly a reason why there's so
You
many
just-
more headphones using planar magnetics.
Well, you just added a sub on your home
Right,
system. Now,
right.
what'd that do for you?
Not as much as I was hoping for,
No?
really.
No, really?
Eh.
Those speakers go kind of four standards.
Well-
with
well-
dual, you got dual woofers on those four standards.
Yeah, they're
anyway,
sealed.
right? Yeah, right.
But the sub sealed too.
Ah.
So it's more of you feel more bass. You don't really hear anything.
Right.
So,
So you crossed it over pretty well.
yeah.
Yeah, well, that's probably good.
So it's I mean it's an improvement,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's not so much power where it's just like
yeah.
you know.
But if you were running like say bookshelves that died below 100 or
oh, it
120,
definitely would help out.
yeah,
mine,
right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the case here.
Right.
When you're dealing with even a headphone that can't go below that.
You know,
well.
I suppose quite a few people probably never really had experienced this to quite the degree that presumably we have. If you have a speaker that just doesn't do bass, right? You have a high-end two-channel system that can sound great, but there's just no bass. It's amazing how boring it sounds, how lackluster it is, how to the average person it just doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
When you don't have that bass impact there, when you're expecting it, you're expecting a thump to come in, it's just you don't feel it, you don't sense it. It's surprising how boring it really is.
Well, particularly
a
when
lot
you
of times.
combine that with the ability to have clarity, because now that shifts the tonality of the playback upward.
Yeah.
Everything sounds brighter than it should.
Yeah.
Because you're lacking the bottom, the foundation, the bottom end to the music.
Right.
So now, okay, so you're in a catch-22 at that point. You're turning up the volume to get more power, to get more bass,
Right.
but it's going too bright at the same time. So you can't find. That's the problem with not having extreme bottom end or the full range is that you can't find a sweet spot in the volume control because every track it's either you're trying to turn it up to get the bottom end, but it goes too bright, so now you got to turn it down. So now where are you in the middle? You're always compromising, if you ask me. If you don't have the bottom end available.
Well, it's kind of like your Merlins without any subs.
Yeah, right. They're pretty good on their own,
But
but it's only a 6-inch driver.
Right.
you
They
know?
only could do so much.
Yeah, right. So-
Presumably you've seen that at trade shows, though, like a bookshelf or something like that somebody's showing. Wonderful clarity, sounds great, but just no impact, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you see the people's responses in the room, and occasionally people are like, wow, this is amazing, this is great. So there's definitely people that appeals to, but the average person off the
front.
street,
Yeah, up front.
most people, they really need the bass.
But
So
over time, it
there's
gets
a
to be
narrow window there.
Yeah,
Could be fatiguing.
yeah, and that's what people I think say with headphones too. If you don't
Same
get
thing, yeah.
the bottom end, In fact, I saw that in a few threads now. It's the theme going on now in HeadFi, where some people are discussing that exactly, where they've learned that if you don't have the bass, that's exactly where you wind up. You're like, oh wow, at a trade show for 10
Yeah.
minutes, but when you live with it for a few weeks, you just can't find the sweet spot. You can't get
Yeah.
it right, and it's too much. Whatever wowed you was overwhelming and doesn't work for a lot of genres and over the long term, which is why we always recommend for people to listen to things for a while. You can't make judgments in 10 minutes
Right.
on what's going on.
Unfortunately, that's hard to do.
Yeah, it is tough to do unless you have it at home
Right.
and with the proper gear. Or a deal. Some of the dealers now have really nice setups. You have a local dealer. Some of them have
Yeah.
some multiple amps to try out, and that's key too, right? With any of these headphones,
Well, yeah.
plug into different sources and amps. I mean, because you're looking for your own personal sweet spot.
Well, and another thing is listening to the music that you would be listening to on it. You know, because it shows the stuff.
Absolutely.
If you have like playlists and you don't know the tracks,
Yeah,
so
sometimes
it might sound
people
good
have
on that.
Yeah.
but-
Special playlists
yeah.
Yeah.
with tailored tracks.
Yeah.
You
Right.
can't pick what you want.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, we run Tidal at the shows just for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, you play whatever.
Type in whatever the hell you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you could hear something that sounds great on a particular track, but then you listen to something you normally listen to, and it just doesn't do it for you, or something you're more familiar with, and it doesn't play it back how you would expect.
Yeah.
Well,
And
yeah.
at the end of the day, I mean, you're going to listen to what you're going to listen to, so that's
Yeah.
what you want it to sound best
Totally.
on, right?
Right.
Totally.
So,
It's always a good time to take your time on this, but
Yeah.
We're getting on a bit of a tangent.
yeah.
yeah. What else is new?
Yeah.
I guess, what do we think about ribbon drivers? They have a purpose, no doubt. They've been used for quite a long time in microphones and in some
Still are.
cases as tweeters. But yeah, and it's very interesting to use them as a full range driver in a headphone. We attempted it and we couldn't manage to make it work to where we thought it would be a compelling product. But
Others have.
it's
I
cool
mean,
to see
they're-
others have.
Yeah, they're selling
Yeah.
it, and it's out there, and it's something for people to try, and then they'll understand it a little bit like we do now.
Mm.
You know.
Well, it seems about as rambly as normal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We rambled on long enough.
I think that encompassed our thoughts, so we might as well wrap it up there. So, as always, feel free to leave comments what you'd like to see in a future video. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and stay subscribed to see more like this. Take care.
Thanks.